Mr. Leonard Pitts, how are you doing today?
I'm well. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. So you just released The Last Thing You Surrender. You've released several novels as of now. Does any part of this ever feel tedious to you, or does it feel brand new every time? Any part of the process?
No, I'm always pleasantly surprised that I get up to write and get paid for writing or telling stories. So no,
Right.
that never gets old. I always enjoy that.
Awesome. So a lot of the book touches on Jim Crow era,
Right.
and how ubiquitous and pervasive it is in everyday Black lives. How important do you think it is for people to understand the legacy of that, and even now, how it affects people now?
I think it's critically important for people to understand all of our history, and certainly our history of race and Jim Crow in this country. And I think it's pretty sad that a lot of us choose not to know it. And I say choose very deliberately. A lot of us have opted out of this. A lot of people who are white say they don't want to know it because it makes them feel bad about themselves or makes them feel guilty or whatever. I've heard a lot of African Americans say I don't want to know it because it makes me angry. It's like
true.
yeah, that's all. Those are lovely excuses, but the fact of the matter is, if you don't know where you came from, then you're gonna have a hard time trying to figure out where it is that you're going.
Absolutely. So one of the characters in the book, Luther, he sees a lot of oppression growing up, including his parents being lynched.
And he sees his parents lynched at the front door.
Right. So later in the story, he ends up going to fight for the country, for war. Obviously, a lot of Black people feel like they're giving their all to a country that doesn't give anything back to
Right.
them. How difficult do you think it is to reconcile, like for everyday African Americans?
I think it's always been difficult. I think that's been sort of the whole crux of our existence as African Americans. It was there at the Revolution. We're going to go and fight for freedom. We're gonna
Who's freedom, right?
We're going to risk our lives for freedom. Who's freedom?
Right.
So that's been the question through every war. African Americans have fought in every war this country has ever undertaken, and that question has never gone away. That as an African American, you're asked to risk your life and to lose your life for American freedom and for American ideals. But somehow those ideals, though they are larger than life, are never large enough to include you.
Right.
So that's Luther's issue. And then again, for Luther, it's even harsher because this is not just dealing with quote unquote everyday oppression, but again, he saw his parents brutally murdered at his front door. They were murdered in like the most awful way you can imagine, and then and it's ruined his life having seen this, having to live with the knowledge of this, and then 20-some years later you come and say, okay, I want you to fight for America.
Right.
Well,
Tough sell.
I got some issues with that.
Right. So I follow you on Twitter. You're very active, and part of your days on Twitter is just explaining basic concepts of race. And how frustrating is it, like, explaining that to the people who need to understand it the most, but yet feeling like sometimes they just don't want to?
I have this expression, and I first started using it with my grandson when he was being very hard-headed about pouring water on concrete. It makes a splash, but nothing sinks in.
Right.
And that's kind of how I feel a lot of times discussing race with a lot of us as Americans. It's just pouring water on concrete because people think they know what they think they know, and they want to believe what it is they want to believe, and you can bring them all the fact that you want. But if it causes them too much emotional pain, then they tend to want to reject it.
They just don't want to do it.
Yeah, and so that really troubles me. The fact that people are so proud, not just ignorant, but proudly ignorant of all the forces that shaped this country. You can ignore the truth, but the truth will never ignore you.
Right.
So, and at some point you're going to have to deal with it.
And it's even more obvious now, right? It seems like people are much more proud of their ignorance, like these past couple of years.
Ignorance has been made, quote unquote, respectable. It wasn't, for about 40, 50 years, it wasn't respectable anymore. You could be ignorant in the 40s and the 50s, and it was respectable. You could be a flat out racist, and you didn't have to hold your head down. You could still go to the nice parties in most places, and so forth. After the civil rights movement, well, no, you could still be a racist, but you kind of had to, at least give lip service.
Right.
You had to at least give lip service. Yeah, I believe in equality, that kind of thing. Now, thanks to the situation that we're living in now, you don't even have to give lip service anymore.
Right.
We are seeing people become increasingly open, And I think in large part of that, I think, has to do with this idea that we never really wanted to face or deal with what brought us here. It has to do with this ignorance of history.
Right.
Because if you understand anything of history, then a lot of what we've been seeing, not just this guy in the White House, but a lot of what we've been seeing ramping up to him, should have been very familiar to you.
Yeah.
Should have been very familiar to you if you know anything about history. It's not specifically about race, but when this guy was running for office, I just read 2 books. One was Hitlerland by Andrew Nagorski. The other was I think it was In the Garden of Good and Evil. I forget the author of that. But they're both about Germany in the 1930s. So I'm like, that's like top of mind.
Right.
And I'm saying, when he starts doing his stuff, I'm like, we've seen this before. And I thought, okay, it's just me. I'm just crazy because I don't like it. And then Holocaust survivors started saying, and Frank, Frank's sister says, no, we've seen this before. This reminds me of something. And when Holocaust survivors started saying, I'm like, okay, I'm not crazy.
People forget it was just like a normal party at first in Germany.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a normal party.
Well, what's really not funny, but what was really interesting is that when he came to power, Franz von Papen was like, I guess he was a high figure in the German government. I forget his exact title. His thing was, he's a buffoon we can control him.
Right.
He's an idiot. He's not going to do too much harm. We'll keep him in line. Paul Ryan, said pretty much the exact same thing when this guy came to power. Paul Ryan is now gone, living private life, doing whatever he's doing, and this guy's wreaking havoc on the country and around the world.
Right. Yeah. So back to the book. A lot of your books that you create are like historical pieces.
Yeah.
What is it about history or about a particular setting that you feel allows you to paint the most effective picture?
I don't know. I think, and maybe it's just me, but in a lot of ways, history, what happened in the past, is more real to me than what's happening right now.
Right.
I don't know why that is, but I'm really fascinated. I think like a lot of us, when I was in school, I was taught history poorly. It was all about, can you memorize the date of this treaty and this general who said this, that, and the other. And that stuff, you do it enough to get the grades you need to get, and you move on, but it doesn't really do anything for you. But when I got out of school was when I started reading history on my own and like really coming to understand it. History's not about the date that this treaty was signed. History is about how people were living their lives. What was going on and how we got to where we are as African Americans, as a city, as a country. It's about how we get to this moment, and that's what made it fascinating to me. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell stories that sort of took it out of the history books, took it out from being perceived to be dry, and just put you in there. That's what I've always loved about historical fiction. It lets you know what it felt like to be alive in that moment.
Right.
So my novel, The Last Thing You Surrender, is about World War II. The World War II era fascinates me. I've read some fiction on that era. I've read a lot of history on that era. I'm like, man, what must have been like to be alive? Well, let me go. So I listened to a lot of music from that era. I read a lot of books. I looked at some movies, did some research. Said, okay, I kind of got a feel for it. Let's go. And that's, to me, that's I may be weird, but to me that's fun.
No, history is always fun. That's always my favorite subject.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, especially when I feel like it instructs so much about how we're living now.
Yeah, but people don't know that. People think history is boring. History is like sex and war and drugs and everything. Everything.
So another character in the book, George, he's a white affluent man, and a lot of what he sees, tests his fate. Yeah. As it relates to just the war and just race relationships in general. Do you feel like most Americans, they have to uniquely go through an experience to be able to relate to how much racism is a disease in this country? Yeah. And whether or not they go through that, or is it like out of sight, out of mind? That's the only true way that they're going to understand.
I think a lot of people, one of the axioms that you tell writers is don't write about what's happening, write about the people that it's happening to. And I think that's sort of a truth of history. People, if you tell them a thing happened, it's kind of like they know intellectually how they're supposed to feel, but they don't really feel that until you tell them a story about somebody going through that. Right. And then I think that changes everything. It's one of the values, I think, of historical fiction. I could talk about World War II and how horrible it was in the concentration camps and the POW camps and all that other good stuff. But if I give you a character and make you care about that character and make that character real for you, and then put him or her through all of that, then you're going to have a completely different understanding of that. So I think that's, I think for a lot of people, race is something that they don't understand until particularly white people, obviously, until they have some sort of personal connection with it. What's fascinating, I don't know if you've ever talked to the white parent of a black child. You should talk to the white parent. If because you might think some black people are militant and over. Talk to the white parent of a black child, because it's new to them.
Right.
They haven't grown. They haven't seen it. It's been out of sight, out of mind, like you said. You talk to the white parent of a black child. Typically, they're some of the angriest people you ever want to meet about white racism, because suddenly it's there. Suddenly it's not abstract. It's not, oh, this is happening and this statistic says. You followed my little Jamal. You did that to my little daughter.
Right.
And then they just it's become real for them in a way that otherwise it doesn't.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the next question I want to touch on is just speaking in general about. You're very successful at what you do. Great journalist for the Miami Herald, and often there's a lot that comes with speaking about what you're speaking about, whether it's threats, whether it's hate mail. Like, is there ever been a moment that you've been hesitant about speaking truth to power because of the pushback that you've gotten for it, or it's always what you felt like you needed to do?
In the moment that I'm hesitant about doing it, then I need to go do something else. I'm serious, because that's the job description.
Right.
The job description is to do that. Is to speak truth to power, to afflict the comfortable and make to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable.
Right.
That's the job description. So if ever you reach a moment that you can't do that, then you lost all effectiveness as a journalist. So try to write the novel as well, but at some point I've got to get another novel out, because that's what I like doing. The writing the book, writing the column is satisfies a certain need, but writing the books satisfies something else. I always say that the column is like a nice dinner, but the books is like cake afterwards.
Right.
Like the dessert, and you need them both.
Right. You need them both, for sure.
Need them both.
Well, thank you so much
pleasure.
for speaking with Check the Vibes magazine. We really need you out there.
Okay.
So thank you for everything that you
Appreciate
do.
it. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Very good
Nice to
interview.
meet you.